moments I am most thankful. So it's a great privilege to welcome you here this evening. Great.
Part of that story that I recall the most was I'd never heard that name before Mexico, except one other time, and that was Richard, your brother. And so I said, "Hi, Greg Boyle," and you said, "Antonio Mexico," and I said, I know somebody with that name. He's among the holiest men I know. And in my mind, I've always said that there are three. Pedro Rupe, who was the general and who I was privileged to meet, the superior general of the Jesuits, Cesar Chavez, who I was privileged to know, and your brother. And so I remember that was, then I said, holiest guy I know, one of the holiest guys I know. And then I said, he's in prison, that's where I met him. So then it was just the most magical and the best friendship ever. So thank you very much for that. Happy birthday, Maddie. I'm not sure that cake got shared as much as it ought to have, but be that as it may. I like this podium because it hides my panza, so checking your Spanish, I don't know how to say it in Italian. I left, I think on Tuesday to drive here from LA. That's really unpleasant to say that. I just thought I'd mention that. Well, thank you for that kind introduction. I'm undeserving of this. Fortunately, none of this goes to my head. The homies always keep me humble. I had a homie who wrote me from prison. His name, Lefty, we all call him Lefty. I've known him for a long time. And he met this nun in prison. And she was teaching or telling him how the church makes saints. And then he kind of pauses. You can tell he gets wistful in his letter to me. And he says, "Damn, gee, if I was Pope, I'd canonize you right away. With the biggest canon I could find." Thank you very much. Anyway, I was here once before for this event. I can't remember. It was in another life 3 years ago, or what was it? No, but I came to this hall, this event. Am I dreaming that? Yes. No, you remember. Really? Okay. Gotta stop taking Ambien, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, it's a privilege to be with you. And here's what I think. I think everybody in this room has this kind of longing, because this is my sense of the community that you've created here. You want the world to kind of look differently than it currently looks. I think that's why you're here. That's why you gather together. Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So we want to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. And to that end, we want to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. We want to dismantle the barriers that exclude. So as Pope Francis invites us, we want to go to the margins, because that's where the joy and happiness is. When you stand at the margins, look under your feet, the margins are getting erased because you chose to stand there. And you stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, and you stand with those whose dignity has been denied, and you stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. And every once in a while you wander into this privileged place where you get to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. You get to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. You get to stand with the disposables so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And I suspect if kinship was our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice, we would be celebrating it. But you brace yourselves, because people will accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "In this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." Other voices get heard when you go to the margins, and that's how God hopes and dreams it will happen. Of course, none of that makes sense unless we kind of revise our sense of who God is. Spacious and expansive. We settle for a partial God, a lesser God. We do that all the time. We get caught up in notions, as Antonio and Emma know, I buried my mom 2 weeks ago, and she was 92 years old, good old gal, and we used to have dinner once a week, and she was always confiding things in me, and once she said, with quite a lot of guilt, she said, "I feel bad." I said, "Why?" "Well, sometimes instead of praying to God, I pray to Bernie." And that was my dad, with whom she was married for almost a half a century. "I just feel bad. I'll say, please, Bernie, help. And he always does, and I just feel bad about it. And then she kind of shakes it off and she goes, "Well, God's busy, and what's Bernie got to do?" But before she died, there are 8 of us, 5 sisters, 3 brothers, and we'd all take our turns, and a lot of times we'd all be there around her bed, or half of us, or some of us, and when she'd come in and out of consciousness, she'd lock on to one of us. She always did this. Breathless delight, and she'd say, "You're here. You're here." And I realized that that's the singular agenda item for our God, who doesn't really care if you pray to Bernie, you know what I mean? Our God doesn't sweat that stuff. Our God just wants to look at you and say, "You're here. You're here." I had a spiritual director once who said, "We need a better God than the one we have." He was a Jesuit. And that may account for that, but of course he's right. We settle for this partial God, or we get stuck in the 3rd grade and we don't move beyond. God is saying, "Come on, you're here with me." We're in Lent, and we think it's about giving stuff up, but it's really about giving into the tender glance of God, who just wants to sit with you, rest with you. We make a big deal about Jesus' 40 days in the desert, and it's like we think deprivation and growling stomach, and he's eating locusts, and it's torment, and I don't know, he gave up chocolate for 40 days or something, but I suspect it wasn't anything like that at all. I just think it was this mystical experience where God said to him with breathless delight, "You're here." And Jesus said back, "You're here." And that's it. The homies have always kind of helped me understand things and illuminate things. They often do it by way of mangling the English language. But I find it kind of interesting half the time. I remember there was a homegirl, one of our trainees in our 18-month training program, a gang member. Lisa was her name, a tough cookie, and at the end of the day she wanted to introduce her man to me. So she brings him in and she says, "This is my sufficient other." I said, "No doubt." So Homeboy Industries is a $19 million annual operation, and so I'm happy not to have to worry about that. I have a CEO now, Tom Folso, who's Italian, and a wonderful guy, and it's nice not to have to worry about cash flow and meeting payroll and all that kind of stuff. He does. So I had a homeboy come in, one of our trainees again, early in the morning. Damn, gee, my lady, she is in a bad mood today. I said, why? Well, you know, she's beginning her administration period. And I said, well, I just finished mine, so I kind of know what she's going through. But my favorite one happened at San Fernando Juvenile Hall, and in the days, if you remember, the gym, and we were in the gym, and about like 500, guys mainly. I think there might have been one row of females, almost all gang members. And I was vested with my album, my stole, and I was sitting on the chair during the liturgy of the word, and you have the sheet that has the readings in it, English and Spanish on each side. And so I think, I'm gonna close my eyes and listen to the word being proclaimed. And so I did, and I rested the sheet on my lap, and the homies got up, and one kid got up and did the first reading, and then the psalm, the responsorial psalm, and he got up with kind of a overabundance of confidence, and he looked down at the crowd and he said, "The Lord is exhausted." I said, "What the hell?" And it was, "The Lord is exalted." And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's way better. Because if you think about it, obviously, the exalted God is really the God we've created in our own image, because there isn't anybody in this room or outside of it. If you happen to be God, you would want to be exalted. You just would. You would want to be on everybody's lips and that every knee may bend. But our God is sort of spacious and expansive, generous, focused on you. And that's why God, in the original covenant, says, "As I have loved you," the exalted God would have said, "Love me back." But no, "As I have loved you," you gotta have a preferential, special, caring love for the widow, orphan, and the stranger. That's pretty generous. It's a God who says, "It's not about me, it's about us, that you may be one," Jesus said. "That my joy may be yours and your joy may be complete." It's about us. It's about bridging the distance that separates us. It's about kinship. How can we be connected to each other? Now the homies, along with all the stuff they taught me, in the last few years they taught me how to text, and I'm so grateful to them, because I find it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people. And so I'm pretty good at this thing, LOL and OMG and BTW. And the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, "Oh, hell no." And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. I know I can't be alone in being vexed by this autocorrect thing, And once I had a homegirl named Bertha, who's a truly tough character, and on a Sunday she texts me and she says, "Where you at?" I said, "I'm about to speak to a room full of molkas," and molkas is sisters, nuns, religious women. "I'm about to speak to a room full of molkas." I pushed send, and autocorrect told her I was about to speak to a room full of ninjas. Which, she thought was pretty interesting. Even right now, I know you can't even look at it, because the homies, their hair is on fire, and they need money to, completar su renta, finish off their rent, or they're going to cut off my lights, and everything is quite dire. And a homie needed $100 for his rent. I did not have it. So I wrote him back and I said, "Things are tight." And I pushed send, and autocorrect told him, "Thongs are tight." And he wrote back, "Sorry to hear that." what about my rent? So anyway, I told you all that to tell you this. I'm in a car with two homies, Manuel and Poncho, older vatos, and we were about to go to give a talk at a high school. So we meet for our morning meeting, which happens at 10 minutes to 9. Hundreds and hundreds of all our workers. It's just packed. Up the stairwell, up on the banister and everything. And then we get in the car to drive to Palm Desert to speak at a high school. And Manuel's in the front seat, Poncho's in the back. Manuel gets an incoming, and he reads the text to himself, and he chuckles. And I said, what is it? He goes, oh, it's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office. Well, I just seen Snoopy. Snoopy greeted me, gave me a big abrazo, and Snoopy and Manuel work together in the clock-in room where they clock in hundreds and hundreds of our workers, and it's a tough job. I wouldn't want it, because gang members can occasionally be attitudinal. And I said, well, what's he say? Oh, God, it's dumb. Hang on. Here it is. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy. Well, I nearly drove in the oncoming traffic. We laughed so damn hard, the three of us. Then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other. Now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them? At Homeboy Industries, I'm not the great healer, and that gang member over there is in need of my exquisite healing. The truth be told, we're all a cry for help. We're all in need of healing. It's one of the things that joins us together as members of the human family. You know, everybody in this room is dedicated to service, and that's a great thing, but that's a beginning thing, you know. The service is the hallway that leads to the ballroom. The ballroom is the place of kinship and connection, where there is no daylight that separates us. Even in service sometimes, service provider, service recipient, you want to bridge that. You don't want there to be a distance. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez, and he was like the best listener ever. If you were talking to him, nobody else existed. Singularly focused on you. He was never looking over your shoulder to see if someone more important was coming. But once famously, a reporter had commented to him and said, wow, these farm workers, they sure love you. And Cesar just shrugged and smiled and said, the feeling's mutual. And that's God's dream come true, where it's not service provider, service recipient, there's no daylight separating us. At No Home, he found more job opportunities than this guy we all called Dreamer. He grew up in the housing projects where I was pastor, Pico Gardens. He got into a gang when he was a little mocosito, and then his older brothers were from a gang as well. He's in his 40s now. He lives out this way. He's in construction, has a house, is married with kids. But in his early 20s, he was kind of a yo-yo, in and out of being locked up. And I'd find him a job in the private sector or in one of our businesses at Homeboy. And then he'd always sort of gravitate back to vague criminality, usually something involving drugs, the sale of or the use of, and then he'd wander back to me. Very frustrating pattern that kept repeating itself. So this one time he finished 4-month stretch probation violation. There he's sitting in front of my desk at Homeboy, and he says what gang members often say, this time it'll be different. I go, all right. So with him sitting there, I pick up the phone, I call a friend of mine named Gary, who runs a vending machine company in Alhambra. He hired homies in the past. I'm just hoping against hope, maybe he can do it again. Sure enough, he says, you tell that guy he can start tomorrow. That's a holy man right there. So, Dreamer began work the next day at the vending machine company. Well, 2 weeks later, there he is again in front of my desk. Could not believe it. I said, hijo de madre santa, here we are all over again. But this time he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out his very first paycheck and he waves it proudly. And he says, damn, gee, this paycheck makes me feel proper. I mean, my mom, she's proud of me, and my kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job. And I said, well, gosh, who? And he looked at me strangely and he said, well, God, of course. I said, oh, sure, no, that's right. That would be God. You thought I was going to say you. I said, no, gosh, God's number one. You are so lucky, he says, that we're not living in them Genesis days. I'm sorry, them Genesis days? He goes, yeah, because God would have had struck down your ass already by now. Well, I guess he told me, but we just fell out of our chairs, the two of us, howling with laughter. And I defy you to identify exactly who's the service provider, who's the service recipient. I have no idea. It's mutual. So we're celebrating 30 years of Homeboy Industries this year. Started in 1988 when I was skinny and had hair. And it was the poorest parish in the city, nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other in those days, which was unheard of. Making it, according to the LAPD, the place of the highest concentration of gang activity anywhere was my parish. I didn't know this. I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988. I buried my 225th 2 months ago. Not all from that parish, but I know a lot of gang members. I get asked to do this. The first thing we did was we started a school because there were so many middle school, junior high age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them. So they were wreaking havoc in the middle of the day in the projects, selling drugs. They were violent, writing on walls. So I walked out to them and I would isolate them and I'd say, hey, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? Every single one said yes. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them. So I kind of forced my hand. So right across the street from the church was our parochial school, our grades K to 8, which occupied the first 2 floors of the building. But the entire 3rd floor was the convent where the ninjas lived. And so I gathered all the nuns in the living room and I sat them down and I said, hey, would you guys mind, moving out and we could turn the convent into a school for gang members. And they looked at each other and they went, sure, which was the extent of their entire discernment process. And that brought gang members in large number to our property, church property, not to services, but to our property. And so that led people to say, whoa, wait a minute. Aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? Good people in, bad people out, which was a good, whopping gospel challenge. And then they said, if only we had jobs. And so myself and the women, we marched around the factory surrounding the housing projects, trying to find felony-friendly employers. And that wasn't so forthcoming. So we invented things, the maintenance crew, landscaping crew, graffiti removal crew, a crew to build our child care center, all made up of rival enemy gang members from the 8 gangs in my parish. And then 1992, those of you old enough to remember it, was the unrest right after the Rodney King verdict, and the whole city of LA exploded. But not the poorest pocket, which was my parish. So the LA Times wanted to know, and they asked me, and I said, well, I think maybe it's because we had 60 strategically hired rival gang members who had a reason to get up in the morning, a reason not to gangbang at night, and more to your point of your question, a reason not to ignite their own community. So the next day, a movie producer named Ray Stark read this article in the LA Times. He happened to have $500 million, and he summoned me and he said, "What should I do with my money?" I look back now, and I realize I woefully undershot my request here. But I said, "There's an abandoned bakery across the street from the school. It has ovens. I don't know, we could put hairnets on rival gang members. They could bake bread, we could call it, let's see, Homeboy Bakery." And that was the extent of my business plan. And he said, "Sure." So we were off and running. A month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market. Once we had plural, we changed our name from Jobs for a Future, which was what we called ourselves in the early days, to Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this. Not everything worked. I'll be the first to admit it. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. And nobody ever intends to do such a thing, but now we've backed our way, evolved our way into now becoming the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on our planet. 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors, trying to imagine some hope and a new future. The centerpiece is this 18-month training program, because it's a paid gig. Every homie wants to get in on it. And but what accounts for all our numbers are all the folks who come in to receive the services, like free tattoo removal. We have designated clinic with 3 laser machines and 1 paid physician assistant, and we have 40 plus volunteer doctors. So if any of you are starting to regret that ICF tattoo you have, you can see me afterwards. I'm looking at that table over there. And so therapy, we got 5 paid therapists, but 43 volunteer therapists, and we have so many things. Case management, classes, anger management, we still have a school. We have Music Heals, which is a music program. We have Baby and Me, which is a thing where homies and homegirls are taught how to play with their toddlers. We have all our 9 businesses. Today we launched, kind of officially, our Homeboy electronics recycling e-waste. I didn't even know what e-waste was. I had to be brought up to speed. But that already has 30 workers there. Again, all enemies, all rivals. Homeboy Bakeries, thriving, Homeboy Homegirl merchandise, where we sell our logo stuff. Homeboy Diner, the only place you can get food at City Hall. We have a restaurant at LAX Terminal 4, farmers markets, solar panel installation training program. I don't know what else we have. There's 9 somewhere in there. And Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude, will gladly take your order. Let me ask you, how many of you have ever been to Homegirl Cafe? There you go. Yeah, normally if you go there, you're going to run into some elected official or a movie star. Jim Carrey has been there many times, and Jack Black and Forrest Whitaker. And, once, with only 2 hours' notice, we got a phone call from the Secret Service saying that Vice President Joe Biden wanted to have lunch at the famous Homegirl Cafe. So he shows up with motorcade and Secret Service and entourage and selfies with Uncle Joe. He was vice president at the time. I wasn't there. I was making my annual 8-day silent retreat. So when I got back, I run into Louis Mora, one of the homies, and he says, "While you were gone, we were visited by an MVP Is it doing a VIP? Yeah, that one. VIP. Damn, gee. Imagine here at Homeboy Industries, we were visited by the Vice President of the United States, Mitt Romney. I think you could file that one under all white guys look alike. And I think we may have added a current affairs class shortly after that moment. But most famously of all, Diane Keaton showed up. She Oscar winner, movie star, Godfather movies, Annie Hall. And her waitress was Glenda this day. And Glenda's a big girl, been there, done that, tattooed, parolee, gang member, felon. She has no idea who Diane Keaton is, and so she's taking her order, and Diane Keaton's looking at the menu, and she says, well, what do you recommend? And Glenda rattles off the 3 dishes she really likes, and Diane Keaton says, I'll have that second one, that one sounds really good. And it's at that moment something dawns on Glenda, you know, she looks at Diane Keaton, she says, wait a minute, I feel like I know you from somewhere, you know, like maybe we've met. And Diane Keaton decides to deflect it humbly. Oh, gosh, I don't know, I suppose I have one of those faces, you know, that people think they've seen before. And then Glenda goes, no, now I know. We were locked up together. That just took my breath away when I heard it. And I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings now that I think of it. But suddenly kinship so quickly, Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress, exactly what God had in mind, that you may be one. Our exhausted God wants it to be about us. All of us in this room and beyond it are called to be enlightened witnesses, people who through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love return people to themselves. At Homeboy, we're kind of allergic to this notion of hold the bar up and ask folks to measure up. We don't do it because our exhausted God doesn't do it. He just loves you no matter what. Just looks at you and says, ah, you're here, you're here. So we kind of do the same thing. We don't hold the bar up, we hold the mirror up, and we tell people the truth, knowing that your truth is my truth. My truth is a gang member's truth. It's all the same truth. Here's the truth. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch folks on the margins as they become that truth, as they inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it's huge. But at Homeboy, we know, and you knew this from removing tattoos and from doing spiritual direction, you have to reach in and you have to dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that keep people from seeing their truth. For the principal suffering of the poor throughout history and scripture is shame and disgrace. In the Acts of the Apostles, they have this one odd line that says simply, and awe came upon everyone. It seems to suggest that the measure of health in any community at all, including this one, may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So I get invited to give talks, and so half the time I'm in my office, half the time I'm in Redlands, you know, and I say yes because it always feels important to propose something else, you know. So I got invited some years ago to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. It was an all-day gang-in service for the social workers from 9 to 5 in a ballroom at a hotel, and I figured, well, maybe I'll give the keynote at the beginning, or maybe I'll speak at lunch, or maybe close the day. So I said yes, and I bought my ticket. A week before I am to fly to Richmond, Virginia, I pulled the letter out to look at it again, and to my horror, I discover that I am to be the only speaker all damn day. And I said to myself, oh, hell no. So I invited two homies in, trainees, Andre and Jose, and I sit them down. And I said, look, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up and tell your stories. Take your time. Because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I'd never heard their stories, and Jose gets up first, and he's at the time about 25 years old, and gang member, been to prison, felon, tattooed. Now he's in like his 16th month of our 18-month program. A man solid in his recovery, so he sort of found himself to become a very valued member of our recovery team, substance abuse recovery, and now he was helping younger homies with their addiction issues. Along with being a gang member and been in prison, he also had a long stretch of time as a homeless man, and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. And so he gets up in front of 600 social workers and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasped. And then he says, it sounds way worse in Spanish. Well, honest to God, we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. I think I was 9, he says, when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks me up to an orphanage. She knocks on the door. The guy comes to the door and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she dumped me. My grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through. Second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. A hardcore gang intervention worker, former gang member himself, working in Houston, asked me one day, how do you reach them? And I said, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? We don't go to the margins. to make a difference. We go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make us different. That may feel selfish, and it is. But it's okay, because if you go to the margins to make a difference, how is it not about you? This way it becomes about us. I was interviewed once on the Christian Broadcasting Network by this lady who asked me, what do you do at Homeboy? And I told her everything I told you, from tattoo removal to job training to the creation of a community of tenderness so that gang members can heal and they can reimagine something different for themselves. I went on and on about therapy and case management. The list was long, and finally when I stopped, she kind of made a face and she said, yeah, but how much time do you spend each day at Homeboy Industries? You know, praising God. And I didn't know what to say. So I said, all damn day. I don't believe she liked that answer very much. But it begs this question, what kind of praise does our exhausted God have any interest in? And let me end with this. It occurs, I have 2 books now, Tattoos on the Heart and Bark into the Choir, but when I only had one, it would occur to universities to force their students to read my book against their will. I'm not complaining, but my alma mater, who should be playing right now, and I hope winning because I have them in my Final Four, Gonzaga in Spokane. There you go. Any news? Okay, never mind. Afterwards. No, we'll do it afterwards because I'm on a roll. So anyway, what is it?
Up by 1 point, and they're 5 minutes into the first quarter.
Okay, Gonzaga's up by 1?
Yeah.
Okay. Did Loyola Chicago win?
Yes.
Oh, there we go. Nice going. There you go, baby. The Jesuits, that's what I'm talking about. So, because it's past my bedtime, I need to get home. So let me just finish this off. So Gonzaga invited me to speak there because they had forced all their incoming freshmen to read Tattoos on the Heart. And I said, sure. And then they said, oh, could you bring 2 homies with you? And I always do it if people are going to pay for it, you know. And I always pick homies the same way. I just came back from Memphis and they wanted homies, so I brought homies. So I always pick homies who are enemies, rivals, just to force them to share a hotel room together, just to mess with them. And I always pick homies who have never flown before, just for the thrill of seeing gang members panicked in the sky. I was not that long ago at LAX with 2 older vatos, and one of them seriously said to me, hey, are we flying Virgin Airlines because it's our first time? I said, well, yes, it's a requirement. We'll be coming home an American. So I picked these 2 homies, Bobby, an African-American gang member, worked at the time in a bakery, and Mario, who at the time worked in our merchandise store. Well, I've done this hundreds and hundreds of times with men and women. I've never picked anybody like this guy, Mario. So absolutely petrified of flying that it was kind of getting me nervous. I mean, he was hyperventilating, you know. And we hadn't even boarded the plane. So we're at Burbank Airport, small airport, big bay windows, Southwest Airlines, big planes. But they don't have that hermetically sealed chute that for you to board the plane. You have to walk out onto the tarmac like you're the president, and you climb up the steps at the front of the plane. Of course, the big feature at Burbank are the steps in the back of the plane. And so I'm sitting there with Mario, and Bobby's off walking somewhere, and our plane arrives. It's early morning. That's our plane. I think, oh my God, he may die before we actually climb those steps, you know. And so then I see our flight crew arrives, and it's really early morning, and two flight attendants, females, each have two very large cups of Starbucks coffee. And they're schlepping up the front steps to board the plane before us. And Mario goes, when are we going to board the plane? I said, well, as soon as they sober up the pilots. There they go now. Perhaps I shouldn't have said that. So I should tell you that in our 30-year-old history at Homeboy, Mario is the most tattooed individual who's ever worked there, which is really saying a lot. His arms are all sleeved out, covered in tattoos. Neck blackened with the name of his gang. Head shaved, covered in tattoos. Forehead, cheeks, chin, eyelids that say the end, so that when he's lying in his coffin, in case there was some doubt, the end. I don't know if you ever had to do eyelids. And so anyway, so I'd never been in public with him, and we're walking through the airport, he and I, trying to calm him down, and people are going, oh my God. And mothers are clutching their kids a little more closely, and I go, wow, that's fascinating, because if you were to go to Homeboy tomorrow, ask anybody there who's the kindest, most gentle, tender soul who works there, they won't say me. They'll think for 2 seconds and they'll say, oh, Mario. He still works there. He's behind the counter selling baked goods. If you've ever met him, he's proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. So we get to Gonzaga, and this always happens, you know, the big talk Tuesday night with 1,000 people. What they don't tell you is all day Tuesday is they have 93 other talks, you know, this class, this meeting, this lunch, this class, all damn day. And I tell these students, look, I'm not going to speak in any of them. I want you guys to get up, and I'm going to sit in the back of the classroom. Well, they get up and they tell their stories. They were nervous. Stories of torture and terror and violence and abuse of every imaginable kind. I would not have survived a day of their childhoods. Honestly, God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance. Otherwise, you'd get scorched. So the nighttime talk comes, and again, it's packed, 1,000 people. And I tell them, I said, I want you guys to get up before me. We hadn't planned to do this. Do 5 minutes, tell, you know, kind of your story. And then I'll do my thing. And then I'll invite you to stand on either side of me while we field questions. So they get up, and they were absolutely terrified, and especially Mario, but they do a good job. So then I do my thing, and then I invite the two of them to stand on either side. I go, yes, questions. And yes, ma'am. And a woman stands, she goes, yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario. First question out the gate's for Mario. Well, he's just petrified. And he's a tall skinny drink of water, and he clutches the microphone. Yes. And she says, well, you say you're a father, and you have a son and a daughter. They're about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? You know, what advice do you give them? Mario closes his eyes and he clutches the microphone, and he's just trembling, and I can feel the rising emotions, and he's getting a damn hernia trying to come up with whatever the hell he's going to say. And when suddenly he blurts out, as soon as he says those two words, he rushes back to his microphone clutching, trembling, terrified place. And now I know he's losing the battle with his tears, but he wants to get this sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence. Until the woman who asked the question stands again, and now it's her turn to cry. Why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving. You are kind. You are gentle. You are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand. and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hand, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had returned him to himself. But trust me, that entire audience was returned to themselves, which shouldn't surprise us because it's mutual. And I think that's the only praise our exhausted God has any interest in. We're invited to stand at the margins. Then look under your feet. The margins are getting erased. But we don't go there to make a difference. You go to the margins so the folks at the margins make us different. And pretty soon you cease to care whether anyone accuses you of wasting your time. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. Don't just give up stuff for Lent. Give in to the God who loves you without measure, without regret. And then other voices get heard. We receive the tender glance of God, and then we choose to be that tender glance in the world. Thank you very much.